What happens when arrogance collides with dignity? 30,000 feet above the ground. Imagine boarding a flight, ready for the next step in a life-changing business deal, only to be humiliated, your achievements dismissed, your worth questioned simply because of who you are. This is not just the story of a canceled merger. It is the story of a woman who refused to bow, a CEO who chose truth over silence, and a confrontation that sparked a nationwide reckoning. Dr. Maya Ellison never asked for a fight. She only demanded respect. But one man's arrogance, broadcast in the narrow aisle of an airplane, set off a chain of events that shook Wall Street, shattered an empire, and redefined leadership for a generation. How does one flight transform into the downfall of a billion-dollar empire? How does a single voice of quiet strength expose decades of corruption? And what does it mean for every one of us watching, wondering if dignity can survive in a world built on power? Stay with us as we unfold a story of humiliation turned into history, of silence broken into truth. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss stories that remind us dignity is not for sale. The boarding area of Gate C-27 buzzed with the low thrum of anticipation, that peculiar mix of exhaustion and excitement that clings to airports in the late afternoon. Families clustered around chargers, business travelers tapped furiously at keyboards, and announcements drifted overhead like the steady hum of an engine among the crowd. Dr. Maya Ellison adjusted the strap of her leather satchel and checked her boarding pass again. Though she knew the details by heart, Flight 482 to San Francisco. Seat 2A, first class. Maya moved with quiet poise, the kind born from years of practice. She wore a navy-wrapped dress, simple pearl earrings, and sensible flats, not the ostentatious heels of many executives she often saw at conferences. Her style was deliberate, understated. She wanted to be seen for her mind, not her wardrobe. And yet, she knew from experience that no matter what she wore, there would be those who tried to erase her presence. Her calmness was armor. The flight attendants began preparing the boarding lane, rolling the velvet ropes aside. A man's laughter, sharp and cutting, carried across the gate. Maya turned her head slightly and saw him, Richard Holbrook, CEO of Aerodyne Systems, her would-be merger partner. Tall, silver hair swept back, expensive suit tailored to perfection. He was surrounded by two men she recognized from Business News Clip's board members, allies. His laugh wasn't joyful. It was the kind of laugh that filled space with superiority. Maya's stomach tightened. Though her expression did not change, she had spent weeks anticipating this flight, not just because it would carry her across the country, but because Richard was on it too. They would both be in San Francisco for the merger announcement that promised to reshape the tech industry. Billions at stake. Her company's future. Her future. The gate agent lifted the microphone. "We'll now begin boarding our first-class passengers." Maya rose, the satchel pressed against her hip, the weight of her laptop comforting in its familiarity. As she approached the lane, Richard's voice carried again. "Unbelievable," he said to his companions, not quite whispering. They'll let anyone buy first-class tickets these days. Maya kept walking. She had learned long ago not to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She scanned her pass. The gate agent smiled politely. "Enjoy your flight. Dr. Ellison." The title, spoken aloud, grounded her. Recognition mattered, even in small doses. Inside the jet bridge, the air shifted colder, recycled, scented faintly with metal and carpet cleaner. She moved forward, each step deliberate. The entrance to the aircraft loomed, that narrow doorway where strangers became seatmates and every hierarchy of air travel was enforced. Claire Monroe, The lead flight attendant greeted passengers with a rehearsed smile. When her eyes landed on Maya, something flickered. Her smile faltered for half a second, quickly replaced by professional brightness. "Welcome aboard." Her tone carried a note just shy of genuine. Maya returned the nod, calm. She stepped into the cabin and felt the hush that always defined first class. Wide seats, neatly folded blankets, glasses already filled with water on armrests. She walked down the aisle, aware of eyes on her. Seat 2A, window seat, her favorite, an escape to the sky, and a small claim to space in a world that often tried to deny her any. She placed her bag in the overhead compartment, smoothed her dress, and settled in. The leather seat embraced her like a cocoon. She took out her notebook, not a tablet this time, but an actual notebook, cream pages, blue ink. On the first line she wrote, "Stay steady." The cabin slowly filled. A man in a gray suit took 2B beside her. He nodded politely, already lost in his phone. Across the aisle, Richard Holbrook entered, flanked by his associates. His eyes swept the cabin, landed on Maya, and lingered. His lips curved into the faintest smirk. He adjusted his cufflinks and took seat 3C, only one row behind her, close enough to remind her of his presence, far enough to feign disinterest. Claire Monroe's voice carried as she helped another passenger stow a bag. "We'll be departing on time today. Please make sure all larger items are stored overhead." Her voice had the cadence of authority, a subtle undercurrent that suggested she enjoyed the power of rules. Maya glanced at her watch. 17 minutes until pushback. She felt the pull of memory the first time she flew alone at 22. Terrified, but determined, clutching a borrowed blazer for her first interview in New York. She had promised herself then that she would never let fear dictate her seat. And now here she was, in 2A, carrying the weight of an entire company's future. As boarding continued, a small commotion erupted near the entrance. A young woman with a rolling suitcase argued with a different attendant. Maya caught fragments boarding pass and not on the list. Voices rose, then quieted. The passenger was redirected. The disruption faded, but tension remained in the air, a ripple waiting to spread. Richard leaned toward his associate, not bothering to lower his voice. "You'd think airlines would have better filters for who gets in here." His words weren't directed at Maya specifically, but the implication hung heavy. She pretended not to hear, jotting another line in her notebook, "Document everything." The man in 2B glanced up, uneasy. Their eyes met for a brief second. His expression said what his words did not. He had heard it too. But like so many others, he returned to his phone without comment. Complicity through silence. Maya inhaled slowly, letting the recycled cabin air fill her lungs. She reminded herself of the clause hidden deep within the merger documents, the one she had insisted on, the one Richard had signed without reading carefully. Morality clause, discrimination penalties, liquidated damages in the billions. Her trump card, resting quietly in her files, waiting. But part of her wrestled with doubt. Would it be enough? Would the world believe her over him? Power had a way of bending narratives. She touched the notebook again, tracing the ink of the words she had written. "Stay steady." A soft chime signaled final boarding. The door closed with a definitive thud. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 482 to San Francisco. We're expecting a smooth flight today with an on-time arrival." As the plane pushed back from the gate, Maya closed her eyes briefly. She pictured the city lights of San Francisco, the stage waiting for the announcement, the cameras, the questions, and she pictured Richard's smirk fading under the weight of consequences. Not yet, she thought, but soon. The engines roared to life, a steady crescendo that vibrated through the cabin. The aircraft rolled toward the runway. Maya opened her eyes and looked out the window at the fading sun. Clouds streaked with gold and crimson painted the horizon, a reminder above the noise, above the power plays. There was still beauty, still clarity. She whispered, so softly only she could hear, "Let's begin." The plane lifted from the ground with a force that always stirred something in Maya's chest. The moment of weightlessness, the engine straining against gravity, the city falling away beneath them. It was a sensation she had loved since childhood, when her father would point out contrails in the sky and say, "That is what freedom looks like." Now, sitting in 2A, she wondered if freedom was ever that simple. The seatbelt sign remained lit as the aircraft climbed. The cabin tilted, clouds rushing past the windows. Maya kept her eyes on the horizon, steady and calm. The man in 2B had switched his phone to airplane mode and was already watching something on the seatback screen. Behind her, Richard's voice drifted forward like an unwelcome echo. "Some people look comfortable in first class," he said, his tone light but his words sharpened for impact. "But comfort doesn't mean they belong." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. A couple across the aisle glanced at Maya, then quickly away. No one spoke. Silence. Again. The shield that always protected men like him. Claire Monroe moved down the aisle, checking on passengers. She paused at Maya's row, her expression polite but perfunctory. "Can I get you anything before we begin beverage service?" Her voice carried the faintest undercurrent of skepticism, as though she still questioned Maya's presence in 2A. "Water's fine, thank you," Maya replied. Calm, always calm. Claire nodded and moved on. Maya wrote a single word in her notebook. Pattern. The plane leveled out. The seatbelt sign flicked off with a soft chime. Passengers stretched, pulled out laptops, flagged down attendance. Claire returned with Maya's glass of water, setting it down carefully but without warmth. A small detail. Yet Maya noticed everything. Details built patterns. Patterns told stories. Richard rose from his seat, stretching as though the cabin were his private office. He stepped into the aisle, leaning toward his associates. His voice was pitched just loud enough to carry. "Funny thing about leadership," he said. "It's not about who talks the loudest. It's about who has real experience, real execution. Some people think they can run companies because they've written a few papers or gotten a couple of grants. But scaling, that's a man's game." Maya sipped her water. Her reflection stared back at her from the window. Calm face, steady hands. Beneath the surface, a storm pressed against her ribs. She thought of her team back in Boston, young engineers who looked to her not just for technical guidance, but for proof that a different kind of leadership was possible. She thought of her mother, who had scrubbed hospital floors so Maya could go to school. She thought of the weight of expectation and how men like Richard carried none of it. His arrogance was buoyed by privilege that shielded him from doubt. Claire drifted back into the aisle. "Mr. Holbrook," she said brightly, "would you like to return to your seat while we prepare service?" Richard smiled at her, the smile of a man used to indulgence. "Of course. Just had to stretch my legs." He looked toward Maya deliberately, then returned to 3C. The man in 2B finally glanced up from his screen. He looked at Maya, then leaned closer. His voice was low. I heard him. It was out of line. His eyes darted nervously toward Richard. "But you know, best not to escalate." Maya studied him. His comment was meant as sympathy, but it carried the familiar cowardice of avoidance. She nodded once, saying nothing. He returned to his movie, relieved. Dinner service began. The clatter of trays, the aroma of reheated pasta and grilled chicken, the ritual of fine dining compressed into aluminum tins. Maya accepted her meal with a quiet, "Thank you." Across the aisle, Richard spoke to one of his board members, gesturing animatedly with his fork. Halfway through the meal, Claire approached Maya again. Her tone had shifted, cooler now, as though emboldened by proximity to Richard's status. "Dr. Ellison, I just want to confirm your seat assignment. Sometimes upgrades get mixed during boarding." Maya looked up slowly, her eyes calm but unyielding. "Seat 2A, she said. "Paid for, confirmed," and checked at the gate. Claire's smile was tight. "Of course, just a routine verification." It was not routine. No one else in the cabin had been asked to confirm. Maya wrote another word in her notebook. "Documented." She felt Richard's gaze on her, though she did not look back. His smirk was almost tangible, a silent dare. "How much will you endure before breaking?" The plane hummed steadily, the night sky stretching infinite outside the window. Maya turned her thoughts inward, away from Richard, away from Claire, away from the silent complicity of her fellow passengers. She pictured her team again, the young software engineer who had cried when her patent was approved, the intern who had confessed that seeing Maya at the head of the table had changed her view of what was possible. They were the reason Maya stayed composed. They were the reason she endured. Because her composure was not just hers. It was borrowed strength, collective resilience. And yet, doubt stirred. Would anyone in this cabin defend her if Richard escalated further? Would Claire step in if his harassment became undeniable? Or would silence reign again? As it so often did, she traced the rim of her glass, fighting the creeping isolation. Her calm was not invulnerability. It was discipline, a choice she made again and again. The captain's voice broke through her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. Weather ahead looks clear. Should be a smooth ride into San Francisco." Smooth. Maya almost smiled. Smooth on the surface, turbulence beneath. As the cabin dimmed for rest, Richard leaned forward again, his voice cutting through the hush. "You know what amazes me," he said to his associate, but loud enough for Maya to hear. "How far people can rise on appearances alone. Optics, diversity hires. You polish them up, parade them around. But when it comes to substance," he snapped his fingers, "empty." Maya closed her notebook, her hands steady. She breathed deeply, eyes fixed on the window, where the stars pierced the darkness. Each word he spoke was another piece of evidence, another thread in the web she was weaving. He thought he was asserting dominance. He was laying his own trap. For the first time that flight, she allowed herself a private smile. Not joy, not amusement, but the sharp recognition of inevitability. Richard was not the hunter. He was the evidence. She whispered, so softly it became part of the hum of the engines. "Keep talking." The cabin lights dimmed to a warm glow, meant to ease passengers into the rhythm of a cross-country flight. The hum of engines created a low background vibration, steady and constant. "Dr." Maya Ellison leaned back in her seat, her notebook closed, her eyes resting on the stars that dotted the night outside the window. The sky was vast, silent, and free of judgment. Inside the aircraft, judgment was everywhere. Richard Holbrook had gone quiet for a while, perhaps worn down by his own need to dominate conversations. His board members sat clustered around him, trading hushed words and nervous glances. They had heard his comments. They had seen the way he had targeted Maya. But silence was easier. Silence was safer. The man in 2B dozed, headphones resting around his neck, a couple of rows back. A young woman scrolled through her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was Sophia Reyes, a journalist from a mid-tier tech publication, known more for her sharp tweets than her bylines. Sophia had noticed the tension earlier in the boarding process. She had recorded Richard's offhand comments with the reflex of someone who understood that truth lived in unscripted moments. Now she was reviewing the clips, her finger hovering above the save button. Claire Monroe, the lead flight attendant, passed through the aisle once more. Her smile had cooled into something professional, detached. She carried herself with the confidence of authority, but her glances toward Richard betrayed something else. Not fear exactly, but alignment. She had chosen her side, whether consciously or not. As Maya shifted in her seat, Claire stopped again. "Dr. Ellison," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you comfortable in your seat? We've had instances where passengers were mistakenly placed in premium cabins." Maya's gaze lifted, calm and unwavering. "I am comfortable," she said, "and I am exactly where I belong." Claire's lips tightened. "I see, just following procedure." "Whose procedure?" Maya asked gently. But her words cut sharper than any raised tone. Claire hesitated, then moved on. The exchange was brief, but it hung in the air like static. Richard's smirk returned. He leaned toward one of his companions, whispering, but loud enough that Rose around them could hear. "She plays the part well, doesn't she? So composed, so professional. You'd almost believe she belongs here." Maya wrote another word in her notebook. Witness. The turbulence light flicked on. A chime echoed overhead. The captain's voice came through, calm and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're entering a patch of rough air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The plane jolted, a sudden drop that made passengers gasp. Drinks rattled on trays. Someone cursed softly. Claire moved quickly, instructing passengers to secure items. She steadied herself with practiced grace, then took her jump seat. Maya's hand gripped the armrest for only a moment. Her breathing stayed even. She had known storms worse than this, storms in boardrooms, storms in negotiations, storms in the quiet cruelty of doubters. The aircraft shuddered again, then smoothed into a gentle roll. The turbulence would pass. Yet something else churned beneath the surface. Sophia Reyes, phone in hand, angled her lens just slightly. She caught Richard leaning into the aisle again, his expression animated, his words sharpened by arrogance. "This is what happens when you lower standards. You put people in positions they can't handle. Pilots, leaders, CEOs. Sooner or later, the turbulence hits, and everything falls apart." The words were captured, crisp and clear. Sophia's thumb tapped save. She did not post it. Not yet. Timing mattered. Maya heard every syllable. Her calm cracked for only a second. A flicker of memory rising unbidden. She was 14, sitting at a kitchen table littered with overdue bills. Her mother's hands trembled as she signed another form for deferment, another prayer for time. "You have to be better than perfect, Maya," her mother had whispered, "because they will always expect you to fail." The turbulence smoothed out. The chime sounded again, signaling safety. Laughter bubbled from Richard's brow, forced and brittle. He thrived in discomfort, using it as stage lighting for his performance. But the stage was shrinking. Sophia's eyes caught Maya's for the first time, a quick acknowledgement, a spark of silent solidarity. Daniel Brooks, a tall man in his early 40s seated farther back, had also been watching, a corporate attorney flying home after a week of depositions. Daniel was not the type to intervene in strangers' disputes, yet something about the scene stirred him. Perhaps it was his daughter's voice in his head, asking why the world looked the way it did. Perhaps it was the sight of Richard's smug superiority colliding with Maya's quiet dignity. Daniel reached into his briefcase and pulled out a notebook of his own. He began to write. Dinner trays were cleared. The cabin grew hushed as passengers settled into movies or sleep. Maya leaned back, closing her eyes, but rest did not come. Her mind replayed each comment, each slight, each deliberate humiliation. Doubt whispered in the edges of her thoughts. Would walking away be easier? Would silence protect her company, her team, her mission? Or would silence become complicity, a betrayal of everyone who believed in her? She opened her eyes. The window reflected her face, lit softly by the glow of the cabin. She looked calm. She looked strong. But inside, a battle raged, not between fear and courage, but between endurance and action. How long to endure, when to act? The answers mattered, because one misstep could cost billions, and more than that, could cost credibility. Richard shifted again, restless. He thrived on dominance. He could not let silence sit. The real question, he said loudly, is what happens when people like her make mistakes. Because when men like me make mistakes, we're forgiven. Investors trust us again. But when they stumble, the whole game is over. That's why I'll be taking the reins after this merger. For stability. For the future. His board members nodded uneasily. They were trapped by his gravity, orbiting a collapsing star. Sophia saved another clip. Daniel wrote another note. The evidence was mounting, layer upon layer, like sediment forming stone. Maya breathed deeply, steadying herself. She had chosen to endure this flight, to let Richard dig his own grave with every arrogant word. But endurance was not passivity. It was strategy, and strategy required patience. The captain announced a strong tailwind, shaving 20 minutes off the flight. The passengers murmured approval. Maya smiled faintly. Time was collapsing, but her window was opening. She whispered again, just for herself, "Keep talking." The cabin of Flight 982 had settled into a steady rhythm. Dinner trays had been cleared away. Passengers stretched beneath thin blankets, adjusting to the idea of hours left in the air. Overhead, the seatbelt sign glowed softly, though turbulence had long since passed. In first class, the air was heavier than it should have been, not from altitude, not from pressure, but from Richard Holbrook. He had never been one to keep his voice down. Now, with an audience captive at 35,000 feet, he saw no reason to stop performing. Richard tapped his glass against the armrest until Claire Monroe appeared. She bent toward him, her professional smile tight. "Another whiskey," Richard said. "Make it a double. We are celebrating history in the making." Claire hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Maya. Then she nodded, turning toward the galley. Maya Ellison had been silent for nearly an hour, her notebook resting on her lap. She had filled it with words that anchored her dignity, patience, truth, witness. But she felt the tide rising again. She had seen men like Richard before, men who measured strength by volume, men who mistook arrogance for vision. Richard leaned across the aisle, catching the attention of the man in 2B who had just woken from a light sleep. "Do you know who she is?" Richard gestured toward Maya with his chin, as though pointing to a misplaced bag. She is running a company that is about to merge with mine. $7.8 billion. But between you and me, she is a figurehead, a diversity mascot, nothing more. The man blinked, disoriented, then frowned. His silence was not agreement. It was discomfort. Richard took it as license to continue. I will tell you what is really happening. Once the merger is finalized, we restructure. We bring in real leadership, people with the kind of experience this industry demands, not science fair winners who stumble into power because a board wanted to look progressive. Gas rippled softly through the cabin. Passengers who had been half asleep were suddenly awake. Sophia Reyes, the journalist with the sharp instincts, pressed record again without hesitation. Every word Richard spoke dripped with condescension, every syllable framed by arrogance. Claire returned with the whiskey. Richard raised it high. To the future of innovation, he announced loudly, and to cleaning house when amateurs overreach. His board members sat stiffly, their faces pale. One of them muttered something about lowering his voice, but Richard brushed him off with a wave of the hand. He was a man intoxicated not only by alcohol, but by the sound of his own dominance. Maya finally lifted her gaze from her notebook. She looked at Richard, not with anger, not even with visible contempt, but with a stillness that unnerved him. Silence can be more powerful than confrontation. Her silence made the moment feel heavier. Say something, Richard challenged, his tone dripping with mockery. Defend yourself. Show us all why you deserve to sit in that seat. Maya closed her notebook slowly and placed it on the armrest. Her voice was calm, deliberate, every word chosen with care. The seat I am in is mine because I earned it, not because it was handed to me, not because of anyone's generosity. My company stands where it does because we built technology that saves lives. That truth does not need your recognition to remain true. A hush fell over the cabin. Even Claire, standing by the galley, paused. Richard laughed, though the sound was brittle. That is a nice speech. But speeches do not move markets. Power does. And you are about to learn what happens when you pretend you belong at a table you did not build. Sophia's recording caught every syllable. Daniel Brooks, the attorney farther back in the cabin, closed his notebook. His face had settled into the kind of expression lawyers wear when they see a case win itself. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing calm skies ahead, but inside the cabin, a storm brewed. Richard leaned forward again, raising his voice so that rows beyond first class could hear. You want to know the problem with this industry, he called out, spreading his arms theatrically. We have confused innovation with identity politics. We put people like her in charge to make ourselves feel enlightened. But when it comes to billion-dollar deals, when it comes to steering the future, it takes men like me, men who built companies from nothing. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the second row pulled out her phone, her eyes flicking nervously toward Maya. Others whispered to each other. The line had been crossed, and they knew it. Maya sat perfectly still, her breathing steady, her posture unbroken. Inside, however, she felt the weight of a decision pressing against her ribs. She could continue enduring, allowing him to expose himself fully, or she could act, now, on this plane, before the ground even met the wheels. Her phone buzzed softly in her bag. She glanced down. A message from her chief legal officer glowed on the screen. Evidence is overwhelming. Clause 12.4 is ironclad. Are you ready? Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She looked back at Richard, who had now stood up, despite the fasten seatbelt sign, holding his glass high as though presiding over a banquet. "This is a teachable moment," he declared, "the difference between image and substance. And soon the market will see who was real and who was a fraud." Claire approached quickly, whispering for him to sit down. Richard waved her off. "Relax. I own half the sky. Nobody tells me where to sit." The flight attendant flushed but stepped back. Power had made her complicit. Maya's chest tightened, but not from fear, from resolve. She reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. Her fingers tapped swiftly. A message sent not just to her legal officer, but to her entire leadership team. "Activate." She slipped the phone back into her bag. Her movements were calm, almost invisible, yet seismic in consequence. The world outside the aircraft was about to shift, though none of the passengers could feel it yet. Sophia lowered her phone for a moment, staring at Maya. She saw something in her expression. Not defeat, not even endurance. Strategy. Maya's stillness was not silence. It was control. Richard finally sank back into his seat, laughing loudly, sipping his whiskey. He thought he had won the performance. He did not realize the performance itself was the evidence. Maya leaned back, closing her eyes for the first time that night. A single thought ran steady through her mind. Let him talk. Every word digs the grave deeper. The engines hummed. The sky stretched endless and black outside the window. In the pressurized bubble of the aircraft, history was unfolding, and no one yet understood the magnitude of what had just been set in motion. The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 982 crossed into the heart of the night sky. Passengers shifted in their seats, some closing their eyes, others scrolling aimlessly through glowing screens. The hum of the engines was steady, hypnotic. To most on board, this was just another long flight. But for those in first class, something extraordinary was unfolding. Dr. Maya Ellison sat quietly, her posture unchanged since she sent the single-word command that would ripple far beyond the fuselage of this aircraft. "Activate," on her phone, tucked inside her bag. Secure messages were already in motion. Quantum Shift's legal team began compiling final exhibits. Her communications director prepared a simple but devastating press statement. Her shadow contact at the SEC, a former colleague from her prosecutorial days, had been waiting for this exact trigger. Like dominoes, each step aligned, each consequence inevitable. Richard Holbrook had no idea. He reclined in his seat, satisfied in his drunken certainty. The whiskey had loosened his tongue and fueled his arrogance. But it was his own ego that ensured every cruel word had been captured on dozens of devices around the cabin. He believed he was untouchable, even in midair. That belief was his undoing. Sophia Reyes adjusted in her seat across the aisle, her phone battery dipping dangerously low. Still, she kept it recording, unwilling to miss a second. What she captured tonight could alter the course of two companies, maybe even the entire industry. She had witnessed arrogance before, but never so naked, never so self-destructive. Richard lifted his glass again, looking toward the rows behind him. "You know," he said loudly, addressing passengers who had not asked for a speech, "there was a time when merit mattered, when you built your place at the table through results, not quotas. Now, they hand out companies like trophies at a charity auction. That is what we are watching here." A man in row 3 coughed uncomfortably. A woman in row 2 shook her head and muttered under her breath. Richard didn't notice or didn't care. He was too busy performing. Maya opened her eyes slowly. She studied the man across from her, not with hatred, but with an intensity that stripped away his veneer. Inside, her thoughts moved with precision. Every insult, every dismissal, every attempt at humiliation was no longer a wound. It was evidence. She thought of her father, who used to remind her when she was a girl, "Let arrogance talk long enough, and it will convict itself." Her father's words were a lifeline now. She breathed them in, steadying herself as Richard continued his tirade. Claire Monroe, the lead flight attendant, reappeared, gently tapping Richard's shoulder. "Sir, passengers are trying to rest. Please keep your voice down." Richard waved her off without looking at her. "Relax. I am giving them an education. They will thank me later." Claire stepped back, her eyes flicking to Maya for a fraction of a second. A silent question passed between them. Maya offered no response, only composure. In seat 4C, Daniel Brooks had closed his eyes, though he wasn't sleeping. His legal mind ticked through implications, contract clauses, corporate liability. He could already see the shape of the lawsuit if Richard's board didn't act quickly. He thought of calling an associate to begin drafting language, but then he remembered they were still hours from landing. For now, he simply listened, his face unreadable. Maya's phone buzzed once, then twice. She slipped it out, glancing at the messages in the dim light. Legal officer documents signed and sealed. Clause 12.4 in effect. Communications Director draft press statement ready. Simple, clear. Shadow contact SEC team confirmed. Trigger pulled. Maya slid the phone back into her bag. She looked out the window at the endless black horizon, stars barely visible against the void. At 35,000 feet, the world felt suspended, as though time itself was holding its breath. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. Am I doing this for revenge, or for something larger, she wondered. Her chest tightened with the question. For months, she had anticipated this possibility, even prepared for it. But preparation did not silence doubt. She had seen careers ruined, reputations destroyed, entire companies dismantled. Once unleashed, there would be no pause, no undo. She thought of the young engineers at Quantum Shift, the interns fresh from universities, eyes bright with possibility. They trusted her to protect their work, their dignity, their future. She thought of her mother, who had raised her with the steady belief that progress demanded sacrifice. And she thought of the patients who might one day benefit from the neural interface technology her team had built, the lives that hung in the balance if their work were stifled or stolen. This isn't about him, she told herself. This is about them. About the world beyond this aircraft. The conviction steadied her. The doubt quieted. Her path was set. Richard clapped suddenly, startling several passengers. "You know what I love about flights like this," he announced. His voice too loud, his grin too broad. No escape. You are all stuck with me, whether you like it or not. Just like the industry will be stuck with me. I am the future. Silence followed. Not agreement, not admiration, just silence. Maya tilted her head, studying him as though he were a case study in self-destruction. In her notebook, she wrote a single word, in neat script: witness. The hours crawled by. Richard's voice finally began to fade, slurred with fatigue. He slumped back in his seat, still smirking even as his eyelids drooped. The storm he created lingered, though he no longer had the strength to fan its flames. Passengers whispered in low tones, their phones buzzing with saved recordings. Sophia's eyes gleamed as she reviewed a few minutes of footage. It was enough to tell a story, even without context. She knew what she had captured. She knew its value. Maya closed her eyes again, breathing deeply, centering herself for what was to come. The aircraft hurtled toward its destination. But in truth, the destination had already shifted. When the wheels touched the ground, the world outside would be different. Richard Holbrook believed he had won the night. He could not see that the night itself had already turned against him. Maya Ellison knew. She felt it in the quiet rhythm of her pulse. The silent trigger had been pulled. The unraveling had begun. And somewhere, thousands of miles below, servers hummed to life. Regulators opened files. Lawyers drafted language. The storm was already in motion. The cabin was just the stage. The real reckoning waited on the ground. The first light of dawn crept across the horizon as Flight 982 began its descent. The cabin stirred with the rustle of seatbelts clicking and window shades sliding open. Sleepy passengers stretched, some unaware of the storm waiting beyond the tarmac. For most, this was just another flight ending. For Maya Ellison, it was the threshold of a reckoning. The intercom crackled with the captain's steady voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have begun our approach. Local time is 6:42 a.m. Please remain seated with your belts fastened." The instructions were routine, but in the front cabin, nothing felt routine anymore. Maya sat upright, her expression composed, her thoughts racing. She had not slept, not even for a moment. Instead, she reviewed mental checklists, every sequence of events that would unfold the moment the wheels touched down. Her team had prepared for months. Now, reality would test every line of their strategy. Richard Holbrook slouched in his seat across the aisle, stirred awake with a grunt. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed, but his smirk returned almost immediately, as if arrogance had its own gravity pulling him back into form. He stretched, then looked around at the cabin with a self-satisfied grin. "Did you all enjoy the lecture?" he asked, his voice hoarse but still loud enough to draw glances. No one answered. Phones glowed in several hands, screens quietly active. Richard mistook the silence for deference rather than resistance. He leaned back, muttering, "You'll thank me when you see the headlines." Sophia Reyes, sitting in 3A, had barely slept either. Her phone was at 2%, but she had transferred the footage to her laptop overnight. Multiple copies. She knew better than to trust a single device. Every second of Richard's tirade was secure now, waiting for the moment she hit send. Claire Monroe, the lead flight attendant, walked through the cabin with practiced composure. Her eyes lingered briefly on Maya, then shifted to Richard. She wanted to intervene again, to remind him that civility was expected, but instinct told her it was no longer her battle to fight. Something larger than airline etiquette was unfolding. The descent grew steeper. The ground below began to take shape clusters of houses, highways curving like silver threads, the faint shimmer of water catching dawn's light. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thud, and the cabin shook slightly. Maya closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Steady." She remembered her father's words again, the refrain that carried her through moments of doubt. Let arrogance convict itself. She had evidence, leverage, and the law on her side. Yet beneath the steel of her resolve, a flicker of unease remained. She wondered how far Richard would go once he realized what awaited him. Men like him rarely surrendered gracefully. The wheels touched the runway with a jolt. The engines roared in reverse thrust, and the aircraft slowed. The cabin broke into scattered applause, a habit of passengers relieved to have landed safely. But in first class, no one clapped. The silence was heavier than the sound of rubber on asphalt. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Maya's phone buzzed. She slipped it out discreetly. Communications Director Statement scheduled for 7:00 Eastern. Legal Officer filing delivered. SEC has acknowledged receipt. Shadow contact board members already aware. Expect confrontation. Maya's pulse quickened, though her face revealed nothing. Richard unbuckled early, ignoring the seatbelt sign. He stood, stretching his arms as though he had conquered the sky itself. His voice carried again. Another city, another victory. That's the game. Folks, Claire approached quickly. Sir, please remain seated until we reach the gate. Richard chuckled, waving her off. Relax, sweetheart. I own half the seats on this plane. The words landed like stones in the silence. Several passengers turned to look at Maya, then back at Richard. A quiet understanding had formed. They knew the truth now, even if he did not. The aircraft eased into its gate. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Passengers leapt up, pulling bags from overhead bins. The usual scramble of arrival began. But in first class, the scramble had an edge of tension. Richard grabbed his briefcase and turned toward Maya. Shall we big day ahead? He winked, oblivious to the undertow rising beneath his feet. Maya rose slowly, gathering her bag with deliberate calm. Her eyes met Sophia's for a brief second. Sophia gave the slightest nod. Evidence secured. Witnesses ready. The stage set. The jet bridge attached with a hollow clang. The cabin doors opened, and daylight spilled in. One by one, passengers filed out, their faces tight with the weight of what they had witnessed. Some whispered to each other. Others avoided Richard's gaze entirely. As Maya stepped onto the jet bridge, her phone buzzed again. A push notification glowed on the screen. Breaking news: Quantum Shift cancels 7.8B merger with Sterling Innovations. SEC opens investigation. It was live. She kept walking, her stride steady, her breathing measured. Behind her, Richard's phone began to vibrate furiously in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and froze mid-step. His face drained of color. What the hell is this? He muttered, louder than he realized. He stopped moving, blocking the flow of passengers behind him. Eyes darted toward him, some curious, some accusatory. Maya kept walking. Richard's voice rose, sharp with panic. This is fake. This is manipulation. He jabbed at his phone, calling someone, anyone, but the calls went unanswered. Each ring that failed to connect twisted his panic tighter. By the time they reached the terminal, news crews were already there. Word had spread fast, faster than he could contain. Cameras flashed, microphones lifted, reporters shouted questions. Mr. Holbrook, do you deny the allegations of misconduct? Dr. Ellison? Was this decision planned in advance? Richard shoved past them, barking into his phone. Get the board on the line now. Tell them this is nothing. It's noise. It will pass. Maya paused briefly, turning toward the cameras. Her voice was calm, measured, unwavering. Quantum Shift has exercised its contractual rights under the agreement with Sterling Innovations. We remain committed to ethical technology and transparent leadership. Her words carried across the terminal, broadcast live before Richard could even find his footing. Reporters pressed in closer. Richard's face twisted with fury, but his words came out garbled, incoherent. He was no longer the polished CEO in control of his narrative. He was a man unraveling in real time, under the weight of his own arrogance. Maya turned away from the cameras, heading toward a waiting car. She felt the weight of eyes on her back, some supportive, some skeptical, many curious. But she did not falter. Each step carried her closer to the future she had chosen. A future where leadership meant accountability, not intimidation. Behind her, Richard's voice echoed through the terminal. "You can't do this. You don't have the power." But everyone could see the truth. She already had. The car door closed behind her, muting the chaos outside. For the first time in hours. Maya exhaled fully, her shoulders easing just slightly. The battle was only beginning, but the first move was complete. She looked out the window as the car pulled away, watching the terminal recede in the distance. Her phone buzzed again. Another update. Another domino falling. She allowed herself a brief smile, not of triumph, but of resolve. Richard Holbrook was right about one thing. There was no escape on that flight. But he had been wrong about who was trapped. It was never her. It was always him. The glass towers of downtown San Francisco glittered in the early light, their reflections casting sharp lines across the bay. Inside one of the tallest, on the 37th floor, the boardroom of Sterling Innovations felt less like a chamber of leadership and more like a battlefield waiting for its first strike. Richard Holbrook stormed through the doors, phone in hand, tie askew. He had not gone home. He had not changed. The flight's chaos trailed him like a shadow. His board members were already seated, their faces grim. "You all saw the headlines," Richard barked, tossing his phone onto the table. The glowing screen displayed the breaking news that had spread like wildfire. Quantum Shift cancels 7.8B merger SEC launches. Immediate probe into Sterling Innovations. Silence met his words. Not out of loyalty, out of calculation. Each director weighed their options, their reputations, their futures. Richard slammed a fist onto the table. "This is nothing but a stunt. Ellison is bluffing. We will push back. We will sue. We will enough," interrupted Margaret Dean, a senior board member with steel-gray hair and a reputation for never wasting words. "This is not a bluff. Richard, Clause 12.4 was real. We signed it, and the evidence she has is damning." Richard blinked, incredulous. "Evidence? What evidence?" "She has nothing." Across the table, a younger director slid a tablet forward. On its screen, a video played. Richard's own face, captured mid-flight, whiskey in hand, his voice booming through the cabin. "She is a figurehead, a diversity mascot, nothing more." The room was silent except for his voice echoing from the speakers. "Once the merger is finalized, we restructure. We bring in real leadership." Richard's face reddened as he snatched the tablet away. This was taken out of context. "It means nothing. It means everything," Margaret said coldly. "Investors are already calling. Our stock has dropped 12% since market open. The SEC has issued a formal request for documents. This is not a storm you can spin away." Richard's jaw clenched. He looked around the table, searching for allies. Some avoided his gaze entirely. Others stared back with thinly veiled disdain. The arrogance that had once magnetized them now repelled. "You cannot side with her," Richard insisted. "She is dismantling billions in value, destroying both companies." "No," said another director, his voice calm but firm. "You are. You handed her the weapon with your behavior. You mocked her publicly, on record, in front of witnesses, and you underestimated her resolve. That arrogance is not an asset anymore. It is a liability." Richard's fists tightened at his sides. "So what? You will betray me, replace me." Margaret leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "This is not betrayal. It is survival. The question is not if you step down, Richard. The question is how." The words landed like stones in the pit of his stomach. Step down. He had ruled this company for over a decade, built it into a force with his name stamped on every major decision. Now, in the span of a single flight, his empire was slipping through his fingers. Richard's phone buzzed furiously. He glanced down. Dozens of missed calls, reporters, investors, his own communications team. A message from his general counsel glowed at the top. Do not speak publicly. Every word will be used against us. He ignored it. Listen to me, Richard said, his voice rising. We cannot cave. If we concede now, we lose everything. We fight. We discredit her. We bury her with countersuits until she buckles under the weight. The room shifted. A few board members exchanged uneasy looks. Margaret's eyes hardened. You still don't understand. Do you? She said. This is not about one merger. This is about credibility, trust, reputation. She holds the moral high ground. Richard, and you handed it to her on camera. The SEC will dig, the public will rage, and our partners will scatter. If you remain at the helm, this company will collapse. Richard's voice cracked with anger. I built this company, and now you are destroying it, Margaret replied. The words echoed through the boardroom, heavy and final. Richard staggered back a step, his hand tightening around the edge of the table. His mind raced, searching for a counter, a weapon, any thread of power to pull. But the silence told him what his pride could not admit. His grip was gone. At the other end of the city, Maya Ellison sat in a quieter room, surrounded by her team. The hum of laptops filled the air as lawyers, communications officers, and engineers monitored the fallout in real time. Market graphs dipped and surged on giant screens. Social media feeds lit up with clips from the flight, hashtags trending faster than anyone could track. Maya listened as her legal officer briefed the group. Sterling Innovations is in free fall. Their board is in emergency session. The SEC is requesting financial records dating back 5 years. We expect subpoenas by end of day. Her communications director added, Your statement is everywhere. Media outlets are framing this as a decisive stand for ethical leadership. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly supportive. Maya nodded, absorbing each detail. Her heart was steady, though exhaustion tugged at her. She knew this was only the beginning. Exposing Richard was one battle. Steering through the aftermath would be another. She glanced at her notebook, still resting on the table. She opened it, flipping past pages filled with observations from the flight. At the bottom of the latest page, she wrote a single line. This is not about vengeance. It is about vision. Her team looked to her, waiting for guidance. Maya spoke softly but firmly. We stay disciplined. We let the facts speak. We protect our people. This is not just about dismantling arrogance. It is about building something better. Back in the Sterling boardroom, Richard felt the walls close in. The directors whispered among themselves, preparing for a vote. Margaret's voice cut through again. Richard, you can step down voluntarily and salvage some dignity, or you can be removed. He glared at her, his chest heaving. You think you can erase me? I am Sterling Innovations. No, she replied. You were. The boardroom fell silent. Outside the windows, the city bustled, indifferent to the man unraveling within its tallest tower. The sun had fully risen, spilling golden light across the city. But in the offices of Quantum Shift, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Screens glowed with news feeds, every major network carrying some version of the same story. Black female CEO and $7.8 billion deal. Calls out toxic leadership. Clips from the flight played on loop. Richard Holbrook's words stripped of context because they needed no context. They were damning on their own. Maya Ellison stood at the head of the table. Her team gathered close. Their eyes darted between her and the news, the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. The communications director leaned forward. "We are winning the public narrative." Overnight, support has poured in from investors, civil rights groups, even rival CEOs. The hashtag Dignity in Leadership is trending worldwide. Maya nodded but raised a hand. "We do not celebrate. Not yet. Public favor shifts quickly. This is not just a story. It is a responsibility. We must stay disciplined." Her legal officer spoke next. "The SEC has formally opened inquiries. They have subpoenaed Sterling's financial records. Early whispers suggest there may be irregularities in how they reported overseas revenue." That revelation hung in the air like thunder before a storm. If true, it meant Richard's downfall would be more than reputational. It would be criminal. Maya felt the pull of memory again. Her years as a prosecutor had shown her what corruption looked like when stripped bare. She had put men like Richard in front of juries before, men who wielded arrogance like armor. They always believed they were untouchable until the evidence told another story. She opened her notebook, adding a line beneath her last note. "The storm is not ours to fear. It is his." Across the city, in the penthouse office of Sterling Innovations, Richard Holbrook was anything but still. He paced back and forth, his face flushed, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He barked into a phone, spittle flecking the receiver. "I do not care what the board says. This is about perception. Get me on CNBC, Bloomberg, anywhere. I will control the narrative myself." His communications chief, a weary man named Alan Pierce, stood at a cautious distance. "Richard, with respect, that is not wise. Every network is playing the flight footage. Your words speak louder than any rebuttal we could craft." Richard spun toward him, eyes blazing, then spin harder. "Say it was satire, a joke, anything. Do you think I will let Ellison frame me as the villain I built this company? I will not be humiliated by her or by the press." Alan inhaled sharply, then exhaled. He had worked for Richard long enough to know when resistance was futile. Still, he tried once more. Every legal advisor has warned against public statements. The SEC is watching. The board is preparing a motion. If you go live, you will. "I said book it," Richard roared. Alan lowered his head. "Yes, sir." The war for narrative had begun. By mid-morning, newsrooms across the country prepared for the clash. On one side, Quantum Shift's carefully measured statements highlighted ethics, accountability, and transparency. On the other, Richard Holbrook was about to appear live, raw and unfiltered, on a national stage, in Quantum Shift's war room. Maya watched the monitor as anchors teased the upcoming segment. Coming up, Sterling Innovation CEO Richard Holbrook breaks his silence on the canceled merger and the allegations surrounding him. Her team braced. Some leaned forward, eager. Others sat back, tense. Maya remained composed, her hands folded on the table. Inside, though, a quiet churn of unease stirred. Richard appeared on screen, seated before a backdrop of Sterling's logo. His tie had been straightened, his hair combed, but the fire in his eyes betrayed him. He leaned into the microphone, voice dripping with indignation. "This entire situation," he began, "is a fabrication. A staged ambush by Maya Ellison to boost her company's profile. She knows she cannot compete with us in real innovation, so she weaponized identity politics to tear down what we have built. The so-called evidence is nothing more than doctored clips, taken out of context by passengers with their own agendas. In the quantum shift office, groans filled the air. One engineer muttered, "He is digging deeper." Maya's eyes stayed on the screen. She did not blink. Richard leaned closer to the camera, his tone sharper. "Let me be clear. I am not stepping down. Sterling Innovations will weather this storm. Our investors know strength when they see it. And I will not be intimidated by a woman who built her reputation on quotas rather than qualifications." Gas erupted in newsrooms and living rooms across the country. Even the anchor interviewing him raised an eyebrow, struggling to keep composure. "Mr. Holbrook, are you suggesting Dr. Ellison's accomplishments are illegitimate?" "I'm stating facts," Richard snapped. "She was elevated because it looked good, not because she was good." In the quantum shift office, silence fell. The words hung heavy, poisonous and undeniable. Maya finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Let arrogance convict itself. Within minutes, social media ignited. Clips of the interview spread faster than wildfire. Hashtags multiplied. Holbrook unhinged. Ellison strong. Commentators from every corner of the industry weighed in, many condemning his words as sexist and racist, some calling for his immediate resignation. Maya's communications director turned to her. "We could issue a rebuttal. Condemn the remarks directly." Maya shook her head. "No. Let his words stand on their own. They condemn themselves." Her legal officer added, "The SEC has just updated their docket. Holbrook's live comments will be included as part of the inquiry. This may accelerate their timeline." Maya closed her notebook, pressing her hand lightly on the cover. "Then we stay the course. We do not gloat. We do not falter. We show the world what discipline looks like." "In the Sterling penthouse?" Richard ended the broadcast and turned to Alan with a triumphant grin. "See, I told you. They cannot touch me." Alan's phone buzzed. He glanced down, his face draining of color. "Sir, the stock just dropped another 18% in after-hours trading." Richard's smile faltered. "That's temporary. It will rebound." Alan hesitated. "No, sir. Investors are calling for an emergency board meeting tonight. They are drafting language to remove you. For the first time." Richard's bravado cracked. He sank into his chair, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his glass of water. "They wouldn't dare," he whispered, but deep down, he knew they would. Back at Quantum Shift, Maya dismissed her team for a brief rest. She remained alone in the conference room, the quiet settling like a weight. She stared out the window at the city below, lights twinkling against the morning sky. Her thoughts drifted inward, wrestling with contradictions. She felt vindicated, yet uneasy, powerful, yet tired. She had not sought this war, yet she had chosen not to walk away from it. Her mother's voice whispered in memory again. "You have to be better than perfect, Maya, because they will always expect you to fail." She exhaled, pressing her palm against the glass. "I am not perfect," she murmured, "but I am enough." The war for narrative was not over, but the tide was turning. The city was still buzzing with Richard Holbrook's disastrous interview when the first cracks inside Sterling Innovations widened into fissures. What had once been whispered in hallways now surfaced in public view. Employees who had endured years of arrogance and silence felt the tide shifting. The storm outside gave them cover to speak. At 8 o'clock sharp, the SEC's headquarters in Washington received an encrypted packet. It contained internal emails, memos, and recordings from Sterling's financial division. The sender identified themselves only as Orion. The documents allege revenue inflation in overseas subsidiaries, falsified compliance reports, and pressure from senior executives to bury red flags. The information was precise, detailed, damning. By 9 o'clock, a second whistleblower surfaced, this time directly to a journalist at the Wall Street Journal. Her name was Karen Liu, a former senior accountant at Sterling. On record, she described how Richard had personally pressured her to sign off on numbers she knew were inaccurate. He told me, "If you want to keep your job, you'll keep the numbers clean." He meant clean on paper, not in practice. The story went live within the hour. It spread faster than Richard could make calls. Investors recoiled. Regulators sharpened their knives. In the Sterling boardroom, panic mounted. Margaret Dean sat at the head of the table, her expression severe. "We now have multiple whistleblowers. The SEC has confirmed receipt. This is no longer about a canceled merger. This is a criminal investigation." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "They are liars, bitter ex-employees looking for revenge." Margaret's gaze didn't waver. "And what about the recordings?" "Richard, we have heard them. Your voice, instructing staff to reclassify revenue. That is not bitterness. That is evidence." The silence that followed was suffocating. The directors stared at Richard, their patience thinning. One by one, they realized the man they had followed for years was now the greatest risk to their survival. Meanwhile, at Quantum Shift, Maya Ellison and her team monitored every development from their glass-walled conference room. The atmosphere was tense, but focused. A map of events covered a giant screen whistleblower reports, media coverage, stock fluctuations. Her legal officer leaned forward. "The whistleblowers give this case teeth. It is no longer just about his words or the canceled deal. It is about fraud, manipulation, and accountability at the highest level." Maya nodded, her pen poised over her notebook. She wrote a single phrase: "Truth multiplies when courage finds its voice." She remembered her own doubts from the night before. Was she unleashing something too destructive? But now, as stories surfaced, she saw the bigger picture. Richard had not been a lone offender. He was the head of a culture that punished honesty and rewarded deceit. By standing firm, she had given others the courage to come forward. That realization steadied her. The first ripple reached Sterling's rank-and-file employees. In cafeterias and open offices, conversations grew louder, bolder. Some admitted they had witnessed inappropriate directives. Others confessed to feeling silenced for years. The atmosphere shifted from fear to frustration, and frustration to defiance. Richard felt it too. His calls to allies went unanswered. Investors who once returned his calls immediately now routed him through assistants or sent polite but cold emails. His empire was crumbling from within. That afternoon, the SEC announced a formal probe, complete with subpoenas and interviews scheduled for senior Sterling executives. The news broke across every major network. Cameras swarmed outside Sterling headquarters. Commentators dissected every angle of the collapse. Inside Quantum Shift, Maya sat quietly as her communications director briefed her on the coverage. "Public sentiment continues to lean our way. You are being painted as the leader who drew a line in the sand. Some outlets are even calling this a turning point in corporate accountability." Maya listened, her expression steady. "It cannot just be about me. This has to be about what kind of leadership we allow, what kind of future we build." Her director nodded. "We can frame it that way. This is bigger than one CEO." As the day drew on, Maya stepped into her private office, finally alone. She closed the door, allowing herself a rare moment of quiet. She stared out at the skyline, the sun lowering into streaks of orange and gold. Her chest rose and fell with deep, measured breaths. She thought again of her mother's words, "You must be better than perfect." Those words had fueled her, but they also weighed on her. Did the world really require her to carry so much? She pressed her palm to the window, feeling the cool glass beneath her skin. "I am not carrying this alone," she whispered. "The truth carries itself." The words were not a mantra. They were a release. Across town, in the Sterling boardroom, Richard faced his directors again. The room felt colder, more hostile. Margaret spoke first. "The SEC has scheduled interviews. They are asking for access to your emails. Richard, they are asking for access to your financial approvals. This is not optional." Richard's face twisted. "They cannot touch me. I am the CEO." "No," Margaret replied, her voice steady. "You were—" She placed a document on the table, a draft resolution for his removal. The board members signed one by one, pens scratching against paper. Richard's eyes darted between them. Disbelief etched on his face. "You think you can erase me?" he shouted. "You think Ellison wins because of this circus?" Margaret's gaze was unflinching. "This is not about Ellison. This is about survival. The company cannot survive with you in that chair." Richard's breathing grew ragged. His hands trembled. The walls that once echoed with his authority now closed in with his downfall. By evening, the news broke. Sterling Board moves to remove CEO amid SEC probe. The headline scrolled across every ticker, flashing in airports, office lobbies, and living rooms across the country at quantum shift. Maya read the alert with quiet resolve. She closed her notebook and whispered, "It begins." The reckoning had moved beyond a canceled merger. Now it was justice unfolding in real time. By the time the sun dipped behind the San Francisco skyline, Sterling Innovations was no longer the same company it had been that morning. News vans lined the street outside its glass tower headquarters. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder. Their voices carried live across the nation. Every entrance was crowded with cameras. Employees leaving for the day shielded their faces, some whispering to each other that the empire had finally cracked. Inside the 37th floor boardroom, the mood was electric with tension. Richard Holbrook sat rigid in his chair, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the armrests as if holding on to his position by force of will alone. Around him, directors shuffled papers and whispered among themselves. Margaret Dean stood at the head of the table, calm and deliberate. "The vote is final, effective immediately. You are removed as CEO of Sterling Innovations." Her words were not loud, but they struck like thunder. Richard leaned forward, his face a mask of fury. "You cannot do this. This company is mine. I built it. You owe me everything." Margaret did not flinch. "What we owe is to the shareholders, to the employees, to the law, and you have endangered all three." Two security officers stepped quietly into the room, their presence a signal that this was not a negotiation. Richard's eyes darted from face to face, searching for an ally. None met his gaze. The very people who once cheered his ambition now avoided his stare. "You will regret this," Richard spat, his voice trembling with rage. "Ellison has poisoned you against me. She thinks she has won, but this is far from over." Margaret's tone was steady. "This is not about Ellison. This is about accountability. The investigation will proceed. You can fight it in court, not in this boardroom. The vote was recorded, signatures collected, and the gavel of leadership passed in silence. Richard's reign had ended. As he was escorted out of the boardroom, cameras waited in the lobby, microphones thrust forward, voices clamored with questions. "Mr. Holbrook, do you deny the fraud allegations? Do you have a response to the whistleblowers? Are you stepping down voluntarily?" Richard raised his chin, trying to summon his old bravado. "This is a witch hunt, lies and fabrications. I will clear my name." His voice cracked on the last word, and the cameras captured it all. By the time he reached the black car waiting at the curb, his face was plastered across every live feed. The world was watching a titan fall. Across town. Maya Ellison sat with her team in Quantum Shift's headquarters. The room was quiet except for the low hum of servers and the faint murmur of news anchors on the screens. Her communications director read aloud from a breaking update. The Sterling board has officially removed Richard Holbrook as CEO. Interim leadership will be announced within the week. SEC investigators are scheduled to arrive at Sterling headquarters tomorrow morning. A hush fell over the room. The weight of the moment was undeniable. The man who had mocked her, dismissed her, humiliated her mid-flight, had been stripped of the very power he clung to. Yet Maya's expression was not triumphant. It was contemplative. "This is bigger than one man," she said softly. "It is about what leadership means, what accountability looks like. We cannot lose sight of that." Her legal officer leaned forward. "The SEC will want your cooperation. They may ask you to testify. We should prepare statements and review all contractual documentation in detail." Maya nodded. "We will cooperate fully. This is not just about clearing our name. It is about ensuring the truth comes out." For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, the tension of the last 48 hours settling into her bones. She thought of her father again, of the lessons he repeated when she was young. Dignity is not something given. It is something you defend. She opened her notebook and wrote, "The fall of arrogance is not the rise of ego. It is the chance to rebuild with integrity." That night, Sterling Innovations issued a short, sterile statement. "The board has unanimously voted to remove Richard Holbrook as CEO. The company will fully cooperate with the ongoing investigation." There was no apology, no mention of the words spoken on the flight, no acknowledgement of the pain inflicted, just a wall of corporate language designed to buy time. But the world had already seen too much. On social media, clips of Richard's live interview collided with footage from the flight, side by side. The pattern was unmistakable arrogance, prejudice, and denial. Commentators called it a textbook example of a leader undone by his own words. Investors whispered about the end of Sterling Innovations as a major player. Employees debated whether the company could ever recover. Meanwhile, Maya received a message on her phone from an unknown number. It read only, "Thank you. We were afraid to speak. You gave us courage." Orion. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the gravity of that anonymous gratitude. It was not victory that warmed her. It was the knowledge that silence had been broken, that truth had found a voice. The next morning, before dawn, a convoy of black sedans pulled up outside Sterling headquarters. Agents in dark suits emerged, briefcases in hand. The SEC had arrived. Cameras swarmed as they walked through the front doors, escorted by company lawyers. The world watched as the next phase began. In her own office, Maya prepared herself. She knew the calls would come, interviews, testimony, scrutiny. She did not fear it, but she understood the cost. Her name would be tied to this story forever. Some would celebrate her courage. Others would resent her defiance. That was the burden of leadership. She pressed her palm against her notebook one last time before closing it. "We move forward," she whispered. Richard Holbrook sat alone in his penthouse, blinds drawn, the city outside alive with a rhythm he could no longer control. Empty bottles littered the table beside him. His phone buzzed constantly with missed calls, legal notices, and headlines. He ignored them all. For the first time in years, the man who had strutted across stages and boardrooms with unshakable confidence felt small. The silence in his apartment was deafening. He had built an empire on arrogance, and now arrogance had left him with nothing. The fall was complete. The reckoning had only begun. The hearing room in Washington carried a solemn weight, the kind that pressed down on everyone who stepped inside. Tall ceilings, polished wood, rows of cameras lining the back wall. Every seat was filled. Journalists scribbling notes, staffers whispering to one another. Lenses pointed toward the witness table at the center. Maya Ellison sat there, her posture calm, her hands folded in front of her. A placard read, "Dr. Maya Ellison, CEO, Quantum Shift Technologies." The morning light streamed through tall windows, casting a glow across her face. She wore no expression of triumph, only the composure of someone who knew this was not about spectacle, but responsibility. At the opposite end of the table sat Richard Holbrook. His once sharp suit looked heavy on him, his tie pulled tight as if strangling. Deep lines marked his face, and his eyes darted nervously toward the cameras. His placard read simply, "Richard Holbrook, former CEO, Sterling Innovations." The chairwoman of the committee, Senator Claire Matthews, struck her gavel. "This hearing will come to order. We are here to examine allegations of misconduct and systemic fraud within Sterling Innovations, and to hear testimony from key figures involved." Her eyes shifted between Maya and Richard. "This is a matter of public trust, corporate accountability, and leadership integrity. We expect honesty." The first questions went to Richard. A senator leaned forward. "Mr. Holbrook, did you personally authorize the reclassification of overseas revenue to inflate quarterly reports?" Richard's jaw tightened. I delegated tasks. I do not recall approving fraudulent actions." The senator raised an eyebrow. "We have recordings, Mr. Holbrook. Your voice instructing staff to alter reports. Do you deny this is your voice?" Richard's mouth opened, then closed. The room stirred with murmurs. Cameras zoomed closer. He swallowed hard. "Those recordings are taken out of context. They were—" The senator cut him off. "Yes or no, Mr. Holbrook? Is that your voice?" Silence. Finally, a muttered, "Yes." The chairwoman let the admission hang in the air before turning to Maya. "Dr. Ellison, you were present during the flight where Mr. Holbrook made disparaging remarks about your leadership. Would you describe what you witnessed?" Maya's voice was steady, her tone even. "I witnessed Mr. Holbrook speaking openly, in front of other passengers, describing me as a figurehead and dismissing my qualifications. He suggested restructuring my company after the merger to install what he called real leadership." "Those words were recorded by multiple witnesses," a senator asked. "And what led you to cancel the merger?" Maya met his gaze without flinching. "Trust is the foundation of any partnership. When a potential partner shows contempt not only for you, but for the principles of equity and accountability, trust cannot exist. We exercised a contractual right to withdraw. It was not vengeance. It was protection." Her words carried across the room, firm but free of malice. The public watching at home saw not a feud, but a clear distinction between arrogance and dignity. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Sweat beaded at his temple. He leaned toward his microphone. "This is theater. She is grandstanding to boost her reputation. My company was thriving before this circus. She destroyed billions in value." The chairwoman raised a hand. "Mr. Holbrook, the billions in value were destroyed by fraud, not by accountability. Do not confuse the two." The room erupted in murmurs again. Richard sank back into his chair, his bravado crumbling further. Another senator addressed Maya. "Dr. Ellison, in your view, what does this moment represent for corporate America?" Maya paused before answering. She thought of her father's words, of her mother's insistence that she had to be better than perfect. She thought of every step that led her here, every doubt and every conviction. "This moment is not about one merger, one company, or one CEO," she said softly but firmly. "It is about the kind of leadership we accept. Arrogance unchecked becomes corruption. Silence enables abuse. What we do here sets the precedent for whether accountability is real or just a word." Her voice grew quieter, compelling the room to lean in. "We must decide if dignity and integrity are luxuries or requirements." The stillness after her words was powerful. Even the clicking of cameras paused. Richard let out a bitter laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Inspirational speeches do not build companies. Men like me do." A senator's voice cut back sharp. "Men like you build sandcastles on lies. Dr. Ellison builds on truth." The hearing stretched into the afternoon. Whistleblowers testified remotely, their voices confirming years of misreporting and intimidation. Karen Liu appeared on a live feed, her expression resolute as she described how Richard dismissed her objections with threats. "He told me, play along or find another job. I resigned instead." Another anonymous whistleblower, voice distorted for protection, detailed secret meetings where Richard demanded numbers be altered before investor calls. Each testimony added weight to the case, each voice another crack in the facade. Richard tried desperately to hold. By the time the chairwoman called for a recess, Richard looked diminished. His hands shook as he poured water from the glass carafe, spilling droplets onto the table. His eyes flicked toward Maya, but her calm demeanor only deepened his unraveling. Maya sat in silence, reflecting. She did not feel joy at his humiliation, only relief that truth was being heard. During the break, reporters swarmed the hallways, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted over one another. "Dr. Ellison, do you feel vindicated? Mr. Holbrook, will you resign from the board entirely?" "What does this mean for Sterling employees?" Maya answered with measured words. "Vindication is not the point. Accountability is. This is about ensuring no leader is above the truth." Richard tried to force a grin for the cameras. "This is a witch hunt, nothing more." But his voice cracked again, and the clip played endlessly across every evening broadcast. That night, the headlines were unanimous. Holbrook crumbles under SEC hearing. Ellison's testimony reverberates nationwide. Pundits praised Maya's composure, contrasting it with Richard's denial. Civil rights leaders hailed it as a watershed moment for corporate justice. In her hotel room, Maya finally allowed herself a moment of solitude. She set her notebook on the desk, opening to a fresh page. She wrote, "Accountability is not vengeance. It is the first step to renewal." She stared at the words for a long moment, then closed the book gently. The day had been long, grueling, but necessary. Tomorrow would bring more hearings, more scrutiny. Yet for tonight, she allowed herself a quiet breath. Richard sat alone too, though his solitude was darker. His lawyers left him with stacks of documents to review, but he pushed them aside. He poured another drink, staring at the headlines flashing across his phone. His empire had not just fallen, it had collapsed in front of the world, and it was his own voice, his own arrogance, that had handed Maya Ellison the lever. The hearings stretched into their final day, the air inside the chamber charged with the gravity of what was unfolding. By now, the nation had watched every twist, the whistleblowers, the recordings, the bitter denials, and the quiet strength of Maya Ellison. The chairwoman raised her gavel. We will hear final statements before closing this session. Dr. Ellison, you may proceed. Maya rose slowly, steady and deliberate. She adjusted the microphone, her eyes scanning the room filled with senators, reporters, and citizens glued to the broadcast. I stand here not as a victor, she began, her voice calm, resonant. I stand here as a witness to what arrogance can destroy and to what truth can restore. The chamber hushed, the sound of pens stilled. Richard Holbrook's downfall is not just about one man or one company. It is about a culture that allowed arrogance to masquerade as leadership, a culture that silenced those who saw wrongdoing and rewarded those who enabled it. That culture failed not just Sterling Innovations, it failed every employee, every investor, and every person who believed that integrity still matters in business. She paused, letting the words settle before continuing. But this moment is also about possibility that leadership can be measured not in how loudly one commands, but in how deeply one listens. Possibility that accountability can be more than a punishment. It can be the beginning of renewal. Her gaze swept the room. To the whistleblowers who spoke, thank you. Your courage has reminded us all that truth multiplies when silence is broken. To the employees still inside Sterling, know this: your worth is not defined by one man's misconduct. You are not tainted by his arrogance. You are essential to what comes next. Her voice softened. And to every young person watching, who wonders if dignity has a place in a world of power, yes, it does. You may be underestimated. You may be mocked. You may be told you are not enough. But your strength lies in knowing that dignity is not given, it is defended. For a moment, there was silence so deep it felt like the chamber itself was holding its breath. Then the applause began quiet at first, then swelling into a wave. Senators, staffers, even journalists set aside their pens to join. Maya inclined her head slightly, acknowledging, but not basking. She sat down, her expression calm, her notebook resting beneath her hand. On its final page, she had written a single phrase: renewal begins where arrogance ends. When it was Richard Holbrook's turn, he stood slowly, his shoulders slumped. The man who once strode through boardrooms with unshakable arrogance now looked smaller, diminished. He cleared his throat. I did not intend for any of this. I believed I was protecting my company. Perhaps I was wrong. His voice cracked. But this hearing has been nothing more than a spectacle designed to destroy me. There was no applause when he finished, only silence, thick and heavy, as if the room itself refused to give him validation. The gavel struck. The hearing was adjourned. Outside, the steps of the Capitol swarmed with cameras. Reporters surged forward as Maya exited, her security guiding her through the crowd. Questions flew like arrows. Dr. Ellison, what reforms do you want to see? Do you believe Holbrook will face criminal charges? What is next for Quantum Shift? Maya answered with calm clarity. What is next is simple. We will continue to innovate. We will continue to lead. But above all, We will continue to prove that integrity is not negotiable. The reforms will come, not because I ask for them, but because the public demands them. This is bigger than me. It is about every person who believes dignity must sit at the heart of leadership. Her words became the headline. In the weeks that followed, the ripples spread. Sterling Innovations announced sweeping reforms under interim leadership. A new compliance division was created, reporting directly to regulators. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. Richard Holbrooke faced multiple charges of fraud and obstruction. His once untouchable image was reduced to a cautionary tale taught in business schools across the country. But the bigger story was the movement that grew beyond Sterling. Industry conferences adopted what they called the Ellison Standards Protocols for Transparency, Accountability, and Equity in Leadership. Venture capital firms began requiring companies they funded to meet those standards. Business schools rewrote case studies to include this chapter as a turning point in corporate history. And at Quantum Shift, the work continued. Maya's team redoubled their efforts on their neural interface project, securing partnerships once thought impossible. Investors who valued not just profit, but principle lined up. The company's valuation soared, but Maya never let the numbers be the measure of their worth. In quiet moments, she still thought of her father's words, of her mother's insistence, "You have to be better than perfect." And she realized now that she had carried those words not as a burden, but as fuel. She had proven that perfection was not the goal. Integrity was. One evening, months after the hearings, Maya stood in a packed auditorium at Stanford, invited to deliver a keynote. The students leaned forward in their seats, notebooks ready, eyes wide. She smiled softly before beginning. "You have asked me how to build companies that last. The answer is not complicated. Build them on dignity. Build them on truth. Build them so that when storms come, and they will come, the structure holds because it is honest." The students erupted in applause. And in that moment, Maya knew the story had shifted. It was no longer about one flight, one insult, one canceled merger. It was about a generation watching and learning that arrogance may rise fast, but dignity endures. Far away, in a quiet suburban house stripped of luxury, Richard Holbrooke watched the broadcast on a flickering television, alone, nursing regrets. He muttered to no one, "I should have listened," but the words were empty, too late to matter. Maya, unaware of his isolation, closed her keynote with a simple truth. The lesson is, this renewal begins not in perfection, but in the courage to stand when others expect you to bow. The audience rose to their feet. The applause thundered, and the movement for accountability, sparked in the narrow aisle of an airplane, carried forward into boardrooms, classrooms, and communities across the nation. And so it ends, not with revenge, but with renewal. Dr. Maya Ellison's calm defiance became more than a personal victory. It became a lesson for every boardroom, every classroom, every heart that has ever been told you are less than enough. Richard Holbrooke's arrogance crumbled under the weight of its own lies, while dignity stood tall and lit the path forward. This story leaves us with questions we cannot ignore. How many times has silence protected arrogance? How many leaders have been allowed to harm because no one stood up? And how many more will rise with the courage to say enough? What we take away is simple, but profound dignity is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Respect is not a gift. It is a right, and the fight for justice, whether in a courtroom or the cabin of an airplane, is never just about one person. It is about all of us. If this story moved you, if it made you feel the weight of injustice and the hope of change, Then stand with us. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor truth, dignity, and the power of standing firm.